Madison was known among her friends as the queen of the unconventional pursuit. Barely 20, she was a whirlwind of energy with a penchant for men who had lived longer and loved harder. While her friends were busy looking for college sweethearts or summer flings, Madison found excitement in the charm of men twice her age. The thrill of the chase often took her to vibrant cocktail bars, upscale restaurants, and art galleries filled with men whose laughter was deep and whose stories were rich. On a particularly warm Saturday evening, Madison donned her favorite red dress that clung perfectly to her curves. With her lips painted a bold crimson, she adorned herself with a few sparkling accessories, a pair of chandelier earrings that sparkled in the dim light. She strode into an upscale lounge, her confidence palpable as she surveyed the room, eyeing her prospects. It wasn't long before she spotted him. A debonair figure in a tailored suit, he was engaging in animated conversation with a couple of friends, the lines on his face deepening with every laugh. His hair was a mixture of silver and dark brown, giving him an air of refined sophistication. Madison felt an unusual rush. Mark, as she later learned was his name, was undoubtedly handsome and more importantly, he had the depth she craved. Madison approached the bar, intentionally positioning herself where he could catch a glimpse of her. With a mischievous smile, she ordered a classic martini, making sure to let her eyes wander over the group. Mark noticed her, a flicker of intrigue passing across his face. She returned his gaze with a playful twinkle in her eyes, knowing precisely how to draw him in. Moments later, she sashayed over to his table, injecting herself into their conversation as easily as a warm breeze. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about the best wine regions in Europe. Personally, I believe a good Cabernet can change your life," she remarked, tilting her head slightly, her hair cascading in waves around her shoulders. Mark was clearly taken aback yet amused. "And have you traveled to these wine regions? Or do you simply enjoy an occasional glass?" he shot back, a smirk spreading across his face. Madison paused, feigning innocence. "Just the occasional glass, though I'd love to explore more," she admitted, her voice dripping with flirtation. She leaned closer, giving him an exceptional view of her neckline while keeping her tone playful. "Perhaps you could show me?" Their back and forth spiraled into a teasing banter, establishing an undeniable chemistry. Madison's antics escalated. She challenged him to a game of pool at the back of the lounge, her competitive spirit leading the charge. Mark followed her with a mix of laughter and intrigue, clearly captivated by her audacity and charm. As the evening darkened into night, she brought out her cheekiest move yet. Under the dim lights of the pool table, she leaned over the felt, her dress riding up ever so slightly. "Care to help me with my form?" she suggested, biting her lip playfully. Mark chuckled deeply, stepping closer to guide her, his breath warm against her ear. "Is this how you always charm older men, Madison?" he questioned, amusement lighting his eyes. She didn't miss a beat. "Only the interesting ones," she replied with a wink. Hours flew by like the time-stamped cocktails they sipped, and Madison felt exhilarated. Mark was unlike any other, a man of wisdom and youthful exuberance. Just as the lounge was beginning to empty, he leaned in, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. "Why don't we continue this conversation somewhere quieter?" he murmured. She smiled, an enchanting uplift of her lips. "Lead the way, Mark." The world outside awaited, and with it, a night of charm, laughter, and perhaps the dread of unexplored territory. Madison, with her mischievous heart, was all in. As the night air enveloped them, Madison and Mark strolled hand in hand out of the lounge's grand entrance. They wandered along a winding path lined with towering palm trees and lush greenery, their footsteps in sync with the chirping crickets. The air vibrated with the sweet scent of blooming jasmine, and the soft glow of string lights strung along the pathway illuminated their path. The night had an ethereal quality to it, as if they were floating on a sea of romance. Eventually, they came to a stop, and Mark gestured to a sleek, golden Lamborghini parked nearby. The car's vibrant yellow hue stood out in the dim light, like a fiery gem amidst a canvas of dark blues and greens. Madison's eyes widened in awe as she approached the 2012 Gallardo, a gentle smile spreading across her face. Mark chuckled at her reaction. Welcome to my pride and joy. I know it's a bit flashy, but I just can't resist the allure of this beast. He popped the door open, revealing an interior that was just as stunning as the exterior. The seats were a deep, rich leather, and the dashboard gleamed like polished chrome. Madison couldn't help but let her fingers glide over the controls, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingertips. Mark watched with amusement, happy to indulge her fascination. Go ahead, explore, he invited, his voice deep and soothing. As she ran her hands over the stick shift and the steering wheel, Madison's eyes sparkled with excitement. Mark took the opportunity to show her the various bells and whistles the car was equipped with, explaining the intricacies of its design. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, like a meandering river, with the Lamborghini serving as the perfect catalyst. As the night wore on, they sat in the car, with Madison perched on the passenger seat and Mark beside her, his arm draped casually over the backrest. The air grew quieter, the crickets chirping fading into the distance as they delved deeper into conversation. It was as if time itself had slowed down, allowing them to savor each moment. It was Mark who eventually broached a sensitive topic, his voice tinged with a hint of melancholy. Madison, I should warn you about something. I'm a married man. Madison's expression remained neutral, her eyes locked on his. Is that a requirement for tonight? She replied with a hint of a smile. Mark chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. No, not exactly. It's just, my wife, she was in an accident 2 years ago. She'll never be the same. We've been living separate lives, really. The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Madison's heart went out to him, sensing the depth of his pain. She reached out, her hand finding his on the backrest. I'm so sorry, Mark, she said, her voice a gentle whisper. He squeezed her hand, a look of gratitude in his eyes. I know it sounds pathetic, but I've been living in limbo ever since. I feel like I've been asleep for 2 years, and I'm only now waking up. A pang of sadness echoed within Madison, but it was tempered by her compassion for Mark. She knew that their conversation was a fragile dance, one that balanced the delicate thread of attraction with the gravity of his situation. As they sat there, the Lamborghini's golden exterior glinting in the faint light, Madison felt a deep connection forming between them. The night air pulsed with an emotional intensity, like the first tender shoots of spring pushing through the soil. They sat entwined, their bodies swaying gently with the rhythm of the night, their hearts heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions. Their conversation continued, a slow-burning fire that crackled with unspoken understanding. Madison's fingers intertwined with Mark's, her touch a gentle spark that set his soul aflame. The Gallardo, like a golden serpent, coiled around them, holding them captive in a web of desire and regret. As the night wore on, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation, the darkness pulsating with a promise of what could be. Madison and Mark sat suspended, their emotions locked in a delicate balance of joy and sorrow, their hearts beating in tandem with the pulsating rhythm of the night. As Mark slid into the driver's seat of the Lamborghini, the engine roared to life, vibrating through Madison's body like a confident whisper. She couldn't help but be drawn into the allure of the car, and at that moment, its glimmering yellow-golden shell transformed into a vessel of adventurous temptation. Let's hit the beach, Madison suggested, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Mark nodded, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the winding roads that led toward the ocean. The city lights flickered like stars scattered across a velvet sky, their reflections shimmering in the side mirrors. The scent of salt in the air mixed with the warm night breeze, creating a cocktail of freedom and exhilaration. As they drove, Madison could feel the adrenaline surging within her, sparked by the roaring engine and the anticipation of the night ahead. She playfully tossed her head back, laughter bubbling up as Mark expertly maneuvered the car through the deserted streets. The world outside blurred into a memory, one filled with laughter, speed, and glowing lights. I love the ocean at night, Madison said, gazing out the window as they approached the beach. There's something ethereal about it. The full moon hung low in the sky, illuminating the sand like powdered silver. As they parked, Madison's heart raced. Mark stepped out first, and when he rounded the car to meet her, she felt an overwhelming impulse to seize the moment. As they walked onto the warm sand, Madison playfully took Mark's hand, guiding him toward the shoreline. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore created an almost hypnotic backdrop. The ocean stretched out before them, a vast expanse filled with the promise of freedom. "Isn't it beautiful?" she exclaimed, closing her eyes and allowing the breeze to tousle her hair. Mark's presence was comforting, grounding her as she reveled in the magic of the moment. "Absolutely," Mark replied, his voice low and rich, tinged with an appreciation that matched her own. Madison turned to him, biting her lip, her mind racing with wild ideas. She knew Mark was a man of restraint, someone who held onto his commitments, even when he was tempted. But tonight, she felt a daring spark within her, a burning desire that ignited reckless abandon. As their eyes locked, something unspoken flickered between them, an electric current that made the air around them feel charged. Unseen tides began to shift within her, and she was determined to be a step ahead. In one swift movement, Madison slipped off her panties and tucked them into her clutch, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She could see the confusion and surprise dance in Mark's eyes, but she also sensed the hunger that lay beneath the surface. "Let's take a walk," she suggested with a cheeky smile, her voice playful yet sultry. She led him further down the beach, the sand cool beneath their bare feet, weaving a path into the moonlit paradise before them. As they walked side by side, Madison felt a rush of confidence swell within her. Guided by the moonlight, she wrapped her arms around Mark, pulling him closer, feeling the warmth radiating from his body. She leaned slightly away and guided his hand gently down her waist, allowing his fingers to brush along her skin. He hesitated, but she pressed his hand into the soft fabric of her dress. The fabric felt thin, she knew just how vulnerable this made her. That was the thrill, she thought. She wanted him to realize with every ounce of her being that she had nothing underneath. "Madison," Mark murmured, his voice laced with a potent mix of uncertainty and desire. "Shish," she replied, her breath hitching slightly as she pressed herself against him, feeling the heat rising between them. "Just feel." Mark's hand traveled further, hesitantly at first, then with a growing intensity. The realization washed over him, and a surprise-like admiration danced across his features as he gazed into her eyes. Their breaths mingled, quickening with a frenzied rhythm that mirrored the waves crashing nearby. They held each other tightly, bodies blending in the night as they paused at the water's edge, the cool foam lapping at their ankles. Madison could feel the heat pooling in her gut as anticipation coiled like a serpent ready to strike. "Don't you want to?" Madison started, but Mark shook his head slightly, the solemnity creeping back into his eyes. "I want to save it for another day," he replied, his voice firm yet vulnerable. "Another day?" she questioned, her voice teasing yet a hint of frustration buried within. Their breaths mingled heavily, the tension palpable, but something held Mark back. In that moment, Madison understood that while the attraction was raw and electric, the complexities of their lives, the unspoken commitments and limitations, were deeper than the alluring pull of the night. Madison searched his face, trying to gauge if he felt the same haunting desire that throbbed within her. Yet, the shadows of regret and unsaid objectives were like a low tide, pulling away from the shore. And still, she yearned for something tangible, something to make her feel alive, adrift in the beauty of a night that seemed to hold limitless possibilities. Finally, she whispered, leaning in closer, "Maybe some boundaries are meant to be challenged." Mark's grip tightened on her waist, the heat between them radiating like the sun, but the moment weighed heavily on the decision that loomed in the quiet spaces between them. In that moonlit embrace, they stood at the precipice of desire and restraint, hearts racing, futures uncertain. The air was thick with tension as Madison and Mark strolled back toward the Lamborghini, the moonlight casting silvery shadows on the sand. Madison's heart raced, not only from the thrill of their newfound connection but also from the intoxicating desires that brewed within her. She could feel the heat radiating off Mark's body as he walked closely beside her, yet no matter how drawn she felt to him, his turmoil was palpable, a tangible ghost lingering between them. Mark's thoughts were in chaos. He was undeniably aroused by Madison, heart pounding with excitement and longing, but the shadow of his wife always loomed in the back of his mind. He wrestled with the conflict of wanting to surrender to the night, yet knowing the implications of losing himself in another woman. His love for his wife, even in her current state, remained an anchor, one that held him back even as desire beckoned him closer to Madison. As they approached the car, Mark's desperation took over. "Hang on a second. Can you warm it up?" he asked, handing Madison the keys. He smiled, both sheepish and excited, knowing that he needed just a moment to regain his composure. "I'll just, be right back. Nature calls." Madison nodded, a devilish glint playing in her eyes. With a sly smile, she slid into the driver's seat, fingers brushing over the controls, feeling the power nestled within the engine. The moment he stepped away, her mind raced with possibilities. The car purred as she turned the ignition, feeling a surge of exhilaration. She glanced out the window to see Mark walking toward the restroom, a flicker of playful determination settling in her gut. Madison bit her lip, a wicked idea taking hold. She couldn't help but feel a rush of mischief combined with the rising heat simmering in her core. With a quick glance to ensure Mark was out of sight, Madison toyed with her dress. She hiked it up around her thighs, revealing the soft skin beneath, feeling both liberated and tantalizingly daring. In an unexpected and bold move, she lowered herself down onto the gear stick, the smooth, shiny ball staring up at her like an invitation. With a breathless giggle, she began to rock her hips, riding the stick shift, the vibrations sending pleasure coursing through her. The interior of the car grew foggy, clouding the windows with the steam of the moment. Madison was lost in a rhythm of her own making, the rush of arousal mingling with her defiance. She felt powerful and sexy, the moonlight casting an almost ethereal glow around her. Mark, having relieved himself, made his way back to the car. He felt lighter, determined to shake off the weight of his conflicting emotions. But when he reached the car and opened the door, his senses were immediately overwhelmed. There she was, Madison, her dress hiked up, riding the stick shift with an abandon that made his heart leap. The sight left him breathless, his expression morphed from shock to awe in mere moments. Her hair fell around her shoulders, framing her face, while her movements became serpentine, blissfully unaware of the impact she was making. "Fuck me," he breathed, his voice thick with disbelief and pure desire. Madison glanced up, the surprise in her eyes blending with the flicker of mischief. Was he upset? Annoyed? His tone didn't quite reveal it, but the heat in his gaze implied something else entirely. She arched an eyebrow, biting back a smile, feeling both exhilarated and wildly alive. "Didn't think you'd be gone that long, huh?" she quipped, her voice sultry, the playful challenge clear. "You're next, Mark." Mark swallowed hard, his mouth open in disbelief as he took in the incredible image before him. There was something so captivating about her confidence, about the way she completely owned the moment. It was the hottest thing he'd ever seen, igniting a wildfire of desire deep within him. Her movements were rhythmic, and with every roll of her hips, the tension that had held him captive broke away. His instincts jumped forward, taking a step closer as breath left his lungs. "Madison," he managed, voice raspy, a plea mingled with an urge to abandon all rational thought. But at that moment, he was lost in her, drawn in by the raw hunger radiating from her very being. She smirked, a playful glimmer in her eyes. "What's the matter? Just warming the seat for you." With a bold leap of spontaneity, Mark entered the car, his body pressing against hers. There was an urgency in the air, the developing chemistry igniting like dry tinder to flame. They were both on the brink of something electrifying, the tension they'd navigated now cascading into a potent force of desire. In one swift motion, Mark pressed his mouth against Madison's, their kiss igniting a spark that reverberated throughout the tiny cabin of the Lamborghini. The world outside faded. There was only the fervent energy between them, the crashing waves barely audible, muted by the pounding of their hearts. In that moment, complications faded into the background, overshadowed by primal instinct. The warmth of the night enveloped them, a cocoon of lust and longing, as they surrendered, as all that had once held them back melted away into the fogged glass of the Lamborghini. Mark was consumed. Every cell in his body was ignited by the raw desire that pulsed through him. He was too far gone to worry about rational thought. The sight of Madison riding his car had been a trigger, unleashing a torrent of passion that he couldn't contain. He needed to be closer, to feel the warmth of her skin beneath his hands, to taste the desire that had taken her over. With a surge of energy, Mark reached out and gently grasped the hem of Madison's dress, his fingers tracing the delicate edge of the fabric. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with a knowing glint, and raised her hands to assist him. The dress slipped away, revealing the smooth, sun-kissed skin underneath. As the fabric fell away, Mark felt a jolt of excitement. He wanted to feel her skin, to touch her everywhere, to explore the curves and contours of her body. With a gentle touch, he caressed her shoulders, then drifted his hands down to her waist, feeling the subtle dip of her spine. Madison shivered, her body responding to the gentle pressure of his fingers. She arched her back, her hair spilling down her back like a waterfall of night. Mark's lips met hers in a passionate kiss, their mouths opening to each other in a hungry, desperate bid to consume the moment. The world around them melted away, leaving only the pounding of their hearts, the thrumming of the engine in the background providing a primal rhythm that matched the beat of their bodies. They broke away from the kiss, Madison's eyes sparkling with mischief as she gazed up at Mark. "Now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the purring of the engine. With a nod, Mark helped Madison out of the car, and they stepped together onto the moonlit sand. The air was filled with the scent of salt and seaweed, the distant crash of the waves a soothing background hum. Mark didn't waste a moment. With a smooth, practiced movement, he shed his clothes and stepped out of the shadows. Madison's eyes widened as she took in the sight of him, her body responding to the promise of what was to come. With a tender touch, Mark wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her close. Their lips met in a burning kiss, their mouths opening to each other in a hungry bid for connection. As they kissed, Mark lifted and guided Madison to the bonnet of the Lamborghini, the cool metal a stark contrast to the warmth of their bodies. Madison's eyes locked on his as they stood there, suspended in the moment, their bodies inches apart. The engine purred on, providing a soothing background melody that seemed to match the rhythm of their grinds. With a slow, gentle movement, Mark drew Madison up onto the bonnet, her body pressing against the cool metal. He leaned back, his face inches from hers, his eyes burning with a fierce desire. "You feel so good," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Madison smiled, her eyes sparkling with a sultry glint. "I want you to feel me," she whispered back, her voice a husky purr. As the engine continued to purr in the background, Mark slid into Madison, their bodies meeting in a slow, sensual movement. The world around them melted away, leaving only the two of them, lost in the moment, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Their lovemaking was a slow, tender dance, their bodies entwined as they moved in sync with the pulsing of the engine. Mark felt Madison's heat surround him, her body a living, breathing thing that seemed to match the rhythm of his own. They lost themselves in the moment, their bodies moving in a primal, instinctual bid for connection. The engine purred on, a soothing background melody that provided the perfect accompaniment to their lovemaking. As they moved together, Mark felt a sense of freedom wash over him, a feeling of release that he had been craving for so long. He was lost in the moment, his body and heart fully engaged in the pleasure of making love to this beautiful, vibrant woman. And Madison, her body entwined with Mark's, felt a sense of surrender wash over her, a feeling of being completely and utterly alive. She was lost in the moment, her body and heart fully engaged in the pleasure of making love to this beautiful, passionate man. In the end, it was just the two of them, lost in the magic of the night, their bodies moving in perfect harmony to the rhythm of the engine, their hearts beating as one. The sun began to rise, casting a warm golden hue across the landscape as Mark and Madison lay entwined on the hood of the Lamborghini, exhaustion settling in after a night of unparalleled passion. The world around them was still, the quiet whispers of dawn embracing the horizon as they breathed in the residual thrill of what had unfolded. They had been two souls completely lost in each other, the weight of their lives forgotten in the heat of the moment. As the sunlight crept higher, illuminating the beach with its warm glow, Mark and Madison reluctantly drew apart. They shared a lingering kiss, a sweet and tender connection that left them both breathless. The memories of their night became imbued with a bittersweet essence, enhancing their shared intimacy. "Wow," Madison finally said, breaking the silence. She chuckled lightly, brushing her hair back from her face, the morning light catching the flecks of gold in her eyes. "That was something else." Mark laughed, a warm, infectious sound that made Madison's heart flutter. "Something else" is an understatement. "That was incredible." Reluctantly, they slipped back into their clothes, the thrill of their encounter still echoing in their minds. It felt surreal that such a night had happened, something they would carry with them forever, a secret they wouldn't dare to forget. They climbed back into the car, the leather seats still warm from their exhilarating night. As they drove through the winding roads toward Madison's home, the air was filled with an unspoken understanding. They hadn't exchanged phone numbers or personal details. Maybe they hadn't wanted to break the magic of that night with reality. They drove in comfortable silence, exchanging occasional glances and tender smiles, each knowing they were stepping back into their separate lives, yet tethered together by the stunning memories they had just created. When Madison's home came into view, reality began to settle back in. Mark pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine, the purring of the Lamborghini fading into the background. They both knew this moment would be bittersweet, only one of them would walk away carrying those memories into the dawn of a new day. "Thank you for tonight," Madison said, her voice soft. "It was more than I could have imagined." Mark nodded, a hint of melancholy in his eyes. "It was perfect." For a moment, the weight of the words hung heavy between them, an unbreakable bond forged in a night of reckless abandon. Madison leaned over, pressing a quick kiss to his lips, savoring the sweetness of the moment. "Goodbye, Mark." "Goodbye, Madison." As she stepped out of the car, the door closing softly behind her, Madison looked back one last time, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Mark waved before pulling away, his heart feeling both full and heavy. Weeks passed, and life plodded on, filled with the hustle and bustle of routine. Yet, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The memories of that night lingered, bright and vivid, contrasting starkly against the mundanity of her everyday life. Then, one morning, she sat down with her coffee, turning on the news in the background as she scrolled through her phone. The anchor's voice broke through the quiet haze of her kitchen. She felt her heart leap into her throat as the report unfolded, a tragic accident involving a truck and a car. She didn't need to see the image to know. Her eyes were glued to the screen, horror flooding through her as the realization settled like an icy weight in her chest. It was his car, a 2012 Lamborghini Gallardo that had been ridden off in the accident. The report continued, detailing the crash and mentioning Mark by name. The world around her blurred as shock washed over her. Madison's breath hitched in her throat, tears spilling down her cheeks as she struggled to process the news. She felt the weight of loss enveloping her, a loss not just of the man she had shared passion with but of the connection that had sparked so unexpectedly. In the days that followed, the grief settled like a heavy cloak over her shoulders. She thought of the intimate moments spent on that car, the lightness and liberation they had shared. Part of her was devastated, but another part found solace in the memory of their time together. That night had been one of unfiltered joy and freedom, shared between two people in a moment that felt eternal. Madison could still feel the warmth of his skin, the electricity of their touch. The memory lingered, it couldn't be erased. In a way, she realized, what they had shared was untouched by the world, a beautiful moment that remained immortal, even in the face of tragedy. She vowed to carry that memory with her, finding peace in knowing that for one magical night, they had truly lived. What are your thoughts on this amazing story? Leave a comment and see you for the next veiled confession.